In our poly panel now to discuss this further, we're joined now by Linda Burney. I've seen media reports of that happening and now I've just done it. It's in my head. Linda Burney,
Thank you.
the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Families and Social Services, and also to MP Trent Zimmerman. I should also mix up your last.
It's hard to get wrong.
Let's talk about the testing blitz that's happening in Victoria. We're hearing that almost 1/3 of returned travellers in hotel quarantine are refusing these COVID-19 tests. Trent, what do you make of that?
Well, look, I was shocked at those figures, and frankly, I think it's recklessly indifferent of people that are in quarantine not to agree to have a test, because we've seen the number of people that are in quarantine testing positive is obviously a lot higher than the rest of the population. And so I think it's time that if people are going to be so indifferent to their fellow citizens, that not only do we make testing compulsory in those hotel rooms, but we even actually make it mandatory before people get on a plane coming back to Australia, that they sign an agreement that they will agree to a state's testing regime. If they're not prepared to do that, then they shouldn't be coming back.
Linda, what do you make of this? I mean, we try to treat everybody as adults and you know, we trust them in terms of quarantining themselves and also to agreeing to tests as well. Do you think tests should be made mandatory rather than compulsory?
I wouldn't go as far as saying making them mandatory. I mean, that would be a big decision by the Victorian government.
But we are talking about public health here.
But I agree with Trent. I think it's really selfish. I mean, the reason that Australia is doing relatively well in terms of the virus is because of the testing regimes, and we know how important they are. And for people to not agree to do it, I think is reckless on their behalf, and I think it's quite selfish, and they should be thinking of the greater good, and they should be getting the testing done.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's also part of it's perhaps the messages not getting through to people about the importance of the testing. And we've also seen in this past week examples of the panic buying happening again at Coles and Woolworths. And perhaps whether that's an issue of the message not getting through to people and people therefore feeling a bit apprehensive and anxious. Could that be the case, Trent?
Well, look, I sort of understand it, because once the panic buying starts, then it does become self-perpetuating. But obviously the message that we learned the first time around is there is no shortage of toilet paper in this country. You don't need to panic buy. But I think that with the testing, the message has to continue, and we probably got a bit relaxed over the last few weeks because Australia is just doing so well. But really the key messages from our health officials about testing, not going to work if you're feeling ill, downloading the COVID Safe app, they remain as important, more important today than they were a couple of weeks ago.
Just on that point, you know, the fact that Australia has been doing so well, I do wonder too whether, because that message, we keep hearing that message over and over again, Australia is doing so well compared to the US, the UK, Europe and everything. And so everyone here sort of thinks, well, if we're doing so well, I can be complacent. Do you think there's that ideology?
It's that lack of... I think that probably has crept into our thinking, but we are going to see small outbreaks like that, which is happening in Victoria at the moment, happen in other parts of the country unless we maintain our self-discipline. And that's why it's so important.
Yeah. We're also having discussions about the reopening of state and territory borders. And Linda, I wonder if you're concerned about what that might mean for vulnerable Indigenous communities who've largely been kept isolated at this stage from the coronavirus.
One of the enormous stories out of the coronavirus issues is that there have been no reported cases in any of the remote Indigenous communities. When you think about the fact that the Western Australian government shut down their borders and then shut down borders within the state, the Northern Territory governments had a very hard border, and that's where many of the remote communities are, as well as Queensland. And what's been fantastic is there has been a great involvement of the Aboriginal community-based organisations, particularly the health organisations. So it's been state, federal and Aboriginal community organisations working together, including the land councils that took such a leadership role in the whole issue. But obviously there have been deaths within the Aboriginal community, interestingly in large regional centres and in cities, not in remote communities.
Just on the issue of opening up borders, and it is a very controversial issue, and one of the people who really came under a lot of criticism is Victoria's Premier Dan Andrews. He's been called Dictator Dan on social media and elsewhere as well. Do you think the fact that he is continuing to not open his borders or continuing to not ease as many restrictions, that is going to silence the critics now?
Well, I think what is important is that there is a national consensus that's being delivered through the National Cabinet, and I actually think that one of the great hallmarks of this whole period will be the cooperation we've been seeing between state and federal governments, and we're seeing that at the moment. The states and the federal government are providing massive assistance to help Victoria during their current circumstances, and that cooperation is really important, and we saw that in the National Cabinet just yesterday.
We want to move on to our second topic of the morning. And Linda, earlier this week, Labor called for a royal commission into the Robodebt scheme. Why is that necessary?
It is necessary to get to the bottom of when the government realised or was told that it was illegal and how long it continued to be rolled out with the government knowing that this scheme was illegal. I mean, at the end of the day, I was the Human Services Shadow Minister when this became a reality, and Scott Morrison was the architect, actually. He was the Social Services Minister when Robodebt started. And I think the really important thing to understand, Joe, is that the Robodebt has caused so much personal hardship, angst and worry, and the human side of it has to be considered. And obviously with a Royal Commission, people are compelled to tell the truth, they're compelled to appear, and it has much more teeth than a question in question time or a Senate committee.
Yeah. Trent, I think that is the glaring question, you know, that Linda has brought up too. Why did the government continue and persist with the scheme, even though they'd had warning after warning after warning that this is an illegal scheme and it's ineffective, it doesn't work?
Well, the aspect of the scheme that was found to be unlawful was the income averaging, which was a mechanism that's been used by both Liberal and Labor governments. And when that advice came through, essentially that mechanism was stopped, and what we've seen now is the government making clear that it's going to refund something like 470,000, I think, debts that were generated in part or in full through the income averaging mechanism. And I think that's what's really important, that people will get their refunds for that, which has now been found to be unlawful. And I think that we do have a Senate inquiry that's happening in relation to this. We've obviously still got ongoing court action, so there is ongoing scrutiny about this scheme.
Yeah. Trent, while the debts have been repaid and the Prime Minister has also apologised, as Linda says, Royal Commissions, they have more teeth. People are compelled to tell the truth. In order to avoid this thing sort of happening in the future again, why not go down the Royal Commission road?
Well, I think firstly what's really important is that people are going to get their refunds, and that's what is going to happen. But secondly, the government's always acted in good faith in relation to this. It got advice that the income averaging system was lawful from our legal advisors. Presumably the last Labor government had the same advice. That was subsequently found not to be the case, and the government's acted accordingly. And so there has been obviously an issue in relation to that legal advice, and the government's responded to it. Simple
But
as that.
with all due respect, the assumption that was made at the beginning of the scheme was that it was completely automated and there was no human oversight of the debt notices being sent out. And quite frankly, the algorithm was wrong. What the algorithm that the Australian Taxation Office was using was not the same as the one that was being used by Centrelink, which is why we ended up with such a problem. So it's not true to say that income averaging has been there all along. The actual algorithms were wrong in the very first place.
But as Trent said, there is a Senate estimate that is
Yes.
ongoing at the moment. There is a lawsuit is that not enough?
Well, Labor has made the decision after a lot of discussion that it isn't enough, and that the breadth and the length of time that this illegal system went on, which was 4 years, warrants a Royal Commission. And as I said earlier, the human cost, I mean, Trent's right in saying that, you know, people are going to get refunded, but it won't make up for the anxiety, it won't make up for many of the mental health issues that emanated out of this. And we actually believe perhaps it was a tipping point for some people taking their own life. Now that's very, very serious, hence the Royal Commission.
On that note, we're going to have to end the discussion.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much
Thank
for
you.
coming in. And to tell you, Linda Burney, Trent Zimmerman, it's so nice to have you both in the studio.
Likewise.
In person.
Yeah.
And good luck, Joe, for the next couple of weeks. It's a very
Absolutely.
exciting time.
Hooray!
Thank you.